Hey everyone, welcome back. Excited to dive into another deep dive with you today.
Always ready to explore something new. What's on the docket today?
Well, we're going to be focusing on a legend today, and honestly, a personal favorite of mine,
Oh, intrigued.
Tony Todd. The name probably rings a bell.
Oh, absolutely. Candyman, right?
Candyman, exactly. That's one of his biggest, but honestly, just scratching the surface of his career. We're going to be using an episode of Real Talk with Lady T as our source material.
Sounds like an interesting perspective.
Yeah, so Real Talk with Lady T is the podcast. And this particular episode was a tribute to Tony Todd after he passed away.
Yeah.
So it's a bit somber, of course,
Understandably so.
but also really fascinating to hear people who clearly admired him so much talk about his life and his work. And, right off the bat, they mention his birthday, December 4th, 1954.
Okay.
Born in Washington, D.C.
All right.
And they just go on and on about what an incredible actor he was.
Well, he definitely had a presence on screen.
Yeah, and not just a presence, but real skill.
Yeah.
Like they talk about how he could make you scared, truly scared, but then also bring this depth to his roles. It wasn't just about being the scary guy.
I can see that. He always brought a certain gravitas, even to the more villainous roles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the guy had a crazy long career, over 200 credits in film, TV, even animation. Think about that. Like, most actors would kill for even a fraction of that.
Yeah, he was definitely prolific.
So, obviously, most folks know him as Candyman.
Right.
But he was also William Bloodworth in the Final Destination movies, which is a whole other level of creepy, am I right?
Oh, for sure. That sense of foreboding he brought to those movies was incredible. Like, he knew something you didn't, and it was going to be bad.
And then in animation, he voiced Zoom in The Flash and even Darkseid. Such a range, right?
You don't always see that. Actors who can pull off both live action and voice work so convincingly shows real versatility.
And the hosts actually point that out, too. Like, they specifically mention that he wasn't just a horror actor. He did all sorts of stuff.
Which is important. Gets you out of being typecast, you know?
Right. Like they mentioned Night of the Living Dead, The Crow, The Rock, Hatchet. I mean, that's action, horror, comedy, all in there.
Quite the mix. Speaks volumes about his range, really.
Definitely. And something they focus on a lot, which I found really interesting, was his voice.
Yeah, that voice is pretty hard to forget.
Super deep, super resonant. They were saying it's almost like it became its own character.
Like, as soon as you hear it, you know it's him.
Exactly. And what's so wild is, apparently in real life, he was like the nicest, warmest guy.
Oh, really? That's interesting, the contrast between the on-screen persona and the actual person.
Right. Like on screen, he's often playing these terrifying, larger-than-life figures.
Sure.
But off-screen, he was known for being super down-to-earth and approachable, really appreciated his fans.
It's always nice to hear, especially with someone so successful.
Totally. So they talk a bit about his journey to success, which is something I always find inspiring. Like his first film was Sleepwalk back in 1986.
Okay. Early days, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, who knows what he was doing before that? There's a whole story there, probably years of hustling and honing his craft. And one of the hosts mentioned something I hadn't thought about before.
What's that?
They bring up his theater background. Apparently, he had a scholarship to the Eugene O'Neill National Theater Institute.
Wow, that's a pretty prestigious program.
Yeah, and Lady T actually makes a direct connection between that stage experience and his presence on screen.
Interesting. I can definitely see that. Stage acting can really demand a certain presence, projection, and all that. Maybe that's what gave him that extra edge.
I think so. Like you learn how to command attention on stage.
Right.
And that definitely translates to film.
It's all about knowing how to hold the audience's gaze, even through a camera lens.
Exactly. And then there's this really touching moment where they extend condolences to his wife, Fatima. It reminds you that behind all the fame and the characters, there's a real person with a life and loved ones who are grieving.
Absolutely. Can't lose sight of that human element.
So before we dive deeper into his roles, what stood out to you about his early career?
Well, starting with Sleepwalk in '86 is pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really highlights that he didn't just become a star overnight.
Right.
Like, he worked his way up, took on smaller roles, and gradually built a name for himself.
It's a good reminder for all of us that success rarely comes easy.
Definitely. It takes dedication, persistence, and a willingness to put in the work, even when nobody knows your name yet. So let's talk about some of his roles.
Yeah. Let's get into the good stuff.
I mean, where do we even begin?
Oh, I know. So many good ones to choose from.
Well, obviously, we got to talk about Candyman.
Oh, absolutely.
It's such an iconic role, and I think it really showcases his ability to be both terrifying and sympathetic at the same time.
Right. Like he's this vengeful spirit, but you also kind of understand his pain.
Exactly. There's this tragic element to the character that makes you almost root for him, even though he's doing horrible things.
Yeah, and the way he delivers those lines,
Hmm.
so chilling, so powerful, you can't help but be drawn in.
And did you know he insisted on using real bees in that bee scene?
Wait, really? Like with all the bees crawling on him?
Yeah, apparently he wanted to make it as authentic as possible.
Wow, that's some serious dedication to the craft right there.
I mean, talk about method acting. Most actors would be running for the hills.
No kidding. Okay, so we've talked about Candyman, but what about something completely different?
Like what?
Like his role in The Rock.
Oh, yeah, Captain Darrow. What a departure from Candyman.
Right. He plays this super serious military officer, and he just nails that sense of authority.
It's interesting how he can go from playing these supernatural beings to these very grounded, realistic characters.
And he's convincing in both. Like, you totally believe him as Captain Darrow, even though he's surrounded by guys like Sean Connery and Nick Cage.
And then there's Clown from Hatchet, which is like another extreme.
Oh, yeah. That was hilarious. And totally unexpected after seeing him in these more serious roles.
It shows that he wasn't afraid to let loose and have fun with the character.
And he's got great comedic timing, too. I mean, who knew Candyman could be so funny?
It's a testament to his range, right? He could do it all.
But let's be real. One of the things that really sets him apart is that voice.
Oh, yeah. That deep, booming voice. Instantly recognizable.
And so versatile. Like he could do creepy and menacing, like with Zoom in The Flash.
But then he could also do powerful and commanding, like with Darkseid.
And they talk about this in the podcast, too.
Oh, yeah.
Where, like, even in animation, his voice just adds this whole other level of intensity.
It's true. Like, you hear his voice and you're instantly drawn in.
And what's even cooler is apparently he did a ton of voice work for video games, too.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, like Fallout New Vegas and stuff.
That's awesome. I got to check that out.
Definitely.
Okay.
Makes you wonder how he approached those roles, you know?
Like, how do you create a character with just your voice?
Yeah.
That's got to be challenging.
Right. There's no facial expressions, no body language to rely on.
It's all about using your voice to convey emotion, to paint a picture in the listener's mind.
It's like a whole other form of acting.
And he was a master of it.
So we've talked about his range, his voice, his dedication to his craft. What do you think it is about Tony Todd that made him such an enduring figure?
It's hard to pinpoint, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Like, what makes someone a legend?
I mean, obviously, talent plays a huge role.
Yeah, you got to have the chops, for sure.
But I think with Tony Todd, it goes beyond that.
Right. Like, there's something more.
It's that certain something, you know?
Exactly. And the hosts in the podcast, they kind of touch on this, too.
What do they say?
Well, they talk about how he paved the way for other actors of color in horror.
Oh, that's a great point.
Like, he wasn't just playing these roles, he was challenging stereotypes.
Right. Bringing a new dimension to characters that were often overlooked.
Yeah, and that's a huge legacy to leave behind.
For sure. To be a role model, to inspire others, that's incredibly powerful.
And, you know, even if someone hasn't seen all his movies, there's something about Tony Todd that just sticks with you.
You're right. Like you say, Candyman, and people instantly get that shiver down their spine.
Exactly. Even if they haven't seen the movie, they know it's going to be creepy.
There's something about those iconic characters, those voices, they just become part of our culture.
It's like they tap into something primal, something we all recognize.
I think the hosts called it the power of archetype.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
And Tony Todd, he just had a way of embodying those archetypes.
He brought them to life, gave them a face, a voice.
And those characters, they stay with you. Like you hear that deep voice and you instantly think of him.
It's the power of storytelling, the way it connects with us on a deep level.
And Tony Todd, he was a master storyteller.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts on Tony Todd's legacy?
Well, I think he was more than just an actor. He was an artist, a pioneer, and someone who truly left his mark on the world of horror.
And beyond horror, too.
You're right, his impact was much wider than that.
So to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to go check out Tony Todd's work.
Yeah, if you haven't already.
Experience those chills, those thrills, that incredible voice.
You won't regret it.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep with us.